As a result of the pandemic and the geopolitical tensions, global supply chain has been one of the most focused issues when we talk about world economy. So what happened to global supply chain? What new changes are taking place in the Asia-Pacific region? What's the optimal solution to tackle these challenges? And how should the international community work together, coordinate, and maintain the stability of a global supply chain? To answer these questions and more, I'm very pleased to be joined today by, we have Feng Bo, Executive Vice President of China COSCO Shipping Corporation Limited, and Fabrizio Ferri, CEO of Fincantieri China, and Mr. Liang Waitek, former Secretary of Economy and Finance of Macau, and Ben Simpfendorfer, partner at Oliver Wyman, and Yao Yang, Dean of the National School of Development of Peking University, and George Zhu, Chairman of Vital Thin Film Materials Corporation Limited. Thank you for joining us. I will start with Mr. Liang. We are talking about the global supply chain, in particular the changes and the reasons. So what do you think are the factors, major factors leading to the changes in global supply chain today?
Actually, when you ask what happened, well, it's an unchangeable age now, so anything can happen. So it's just because anything can happen. That's why we have to so well prepare, especially when we talk about supply chain. Well, your question reminds me one term that is quite hot around 15 years ago when we all talk about globalizations. And then somebody merged the word globalizations and localizations together to make the word globalizations. That means if you want to go for a global market, and then you have to adapt to the local culture too. I'm saying now we are at this stage, especially for supply chain, we are acting. Before, we used to be very cost-driven. When we design our supply chain, it all depending on the cost. But today, we are more safety-driven, especially what had happened for the past few years because of the COVID pandemic, because of the conflict between countries, sanctions, all those things happen, which suddenly happened like this. And so rapid, we cannot even react to it. So right now, we understand instead of cost-driven, maybe we have to look at a much safer way of handling our supply chain. Then what's this related to the word just I mentioned, the globalizations? Recently, I'm thinking maybe now we have to go through what I call the re-globalizations. When I start with this RE, that is two meanings. The first meaning may be we have to do it again. The second meaning is it's regional. Why? It's right now we talk about a global market, and simultaneously, we should remember when we need to localize our productions, and then when we try to convert a global supply chain into a local supply chain, there is always a transition. The safest way for entrepreneurs to transfer a total global supply chain into a localized supply chain, the transition is the regional plate. In that case, what will happen? We'll talk about before, it will be the production process will be like a linear. We finish process A, and then we go to process B, and go to process C, and then process D. Then that's the finished products. But in future, in order to have a very safe supply chain and production line, we may have to consider multinational cooperation, multinational basis, and then multi-skill, multi-tax production base. So multi become an important word for this kind of new change. But of course, it's not simple as that. Okay, well, before, as I said, it's linear, but in future, it will be maybe something like this. Like we have A, B, C, normally it should be A, B, C, but then we also have to prepare a production base D and E, and then we have to shuffle around, just in case any of our lines break down. So we always have to make sure we have this constant supply on our supply chain. But in that case, that means another thing. That means, as I said, you have to have a very quick response system. You have to be fully prepared for the industrial metaverse. You have to prepare, and you have intensive training for your multi-skillful workers in order to adapt. Anything happen, and then you can find another base to produce similar things. The aftermath of this multi-investment will be, higher cost. The higher cost of productions will create inflation. The second thing is, to me, is before when we talk about globalizations, the normal globalizations, we talk about a lot of small, medium enterprise. They can benefit from this globalization because maybe they only produce a small screw for these machines, then they can grow big. But in future, you need a really multinational giant enterprise to handle this kind of supply chain. So this is what I'm saying. Whether we should go for the safe or the safest supply chain, or we should go for a more corporations, more harmonious supply chain, that the whole world will get benefit out of it.
Mr. Feng Bo, you are from Costco. In the shipping industry, I guess you are one of the persons who are in the best position to observe the changes of the global supply chain. Share with us your insight and your observation.
In the
past 2 or 3 years, there have been new situations and changes in the industrial chain and supply chain. I would like to summarize the changes in 3 points. First, there has been a huge series of uncertainties. You may still remember that the year before last year, it was difficult to obtain a warehouse. Foreign trade enterprises were feeling a lot of pain. Many products could not be shipped out, there were dock backlogs, etc. So some customers began to diversify, including regionalization measures, to pull the supply chain and industrial chain to their side as close as possible. Secondly, we've been facing a series of challenges like climate change. All countries and all enterprises face social responsibilities to reduce carbon emissions, fulfill environmental protection and green requirements, as well as economic responsibilities, which will increase the operating costs for enterprises. These are relatively high economic cost requirements, and the EU now has a lot of policies to collect carbon tax, which is extremely urgent. I think the challenge of green, low carbon, and environmental protection is not a choice, but something that must happen. Third, there is hope and opportunity, which lie in 2 aspects. One is the new requirements and pressures, which also gives birth to new industries. For example, the production and filling of new energy, including customers' concerns for the safety of their supply chain and the industrial chain, also promotes the creation of new markets, such as emerging markets, third country markets, and regional markets. This is my understanding of the changes taking place in the current industrial chain and supply chain. Second, for an enterprise, especially a shipping logistics business, how should we deal with the changes? I think the most fundamental thing is to increase certainty and reduce uncertainty. And the main way to do this is through unity, cooperation, openness, and inclusiveness. So how do we do this? All countries in the world need to work together. Since we are a chain, we are closely linked together, and no one can be immune. Since the global supply and industry chain has caused problems, all countries in the world should work together to solve the problem through coordination, rather than through breaking the chain or decoupling.
As Mr. Feng mentioned about the security and new market because of the disruption for global supply chain. For example, in the event of the pandemic, some countries say that, we need to build factories to produce facial masks so we don't rely on the China market. But then you can call it like a near-shoring or friend-shoring, measures taken by some countries. But is that really the solution? Is that really secure or resilient in terms of future crisis or future, similar situation?
So to the question, the global supply chain is efficient, but it's fragile. global trade has also peaked over the last 10 years. As a share of GDP, it was 55% in 2010. Today, it's only 45%. So we are at a point of inflection when the supply chain was going to shape regardless. And I thank Feng Xiancheng for your comments around the risks, whether not climate change or pandemics, but as well as politics and the need to build resiliency in supply chains. These are the real drivers for multinationals going forward. So a few remarks to that point. China will remain the world's manufacturing hub. You know, the country accounts for 32% of global clothing exports, of 80% of global smartphone exports. Those figures may decline slightly, but they aren't going to go back to 0% because no other market has the scale or speed of China. But nevertheless, we are going to see some de-risking, again, just to improve the resiliency of the global supply chain. Now, multinationals have three strategies, primarily, to achieve this aim. The first of those strategies is to invest into China's supply chain, where factories are supplying China's consumers. And as the world's second largest markets, consumers here are very important for global brands. The second strategy, though, is to de-risk supply chains by relocating a share of production to other markets, such as Vietnam primarily, but also India, Indonesia. This isn't a new strategy. It's called China Plus One. It's a strategy that many global companies have spoken about and acted on over the last 10 years. The third of those strategies will be the need to shift strategic component parts that are critical to production back into home markets, whether that's Europe or the United States. So I guess the response to that question is that there isn't a single answer, there isn't a single template to solving this disruption. There are multiple approaches, and it really depends on a specific company and their response. I'd also like to argue that it's not a zero-sum game. This isn't about production leaving China for the rest of the world. American firms can invest in Chinese manufacturing, Chinese firms can invest in American manufacturing, or Vietnam, or India, or Indonesia. So it really, and again, to echo some of the earlier comments, it really is about commercial collaboration and making sure it is a win-win scenario and that the global economy, particularly at the multinational level, remains quite connected. To me, that's quite fundamental to what we're going to see.
Interesting perspective over there. Yao Yang, here's a question. There are reasons, obviously, for the formation of a globalization because it's cost-effective and also it's efficient for multinational companies. But now, with the disruption, for example, Ukraine crisis, U.S. restrictive trade policies toward the Chinese side, etc., pandemic. So for the multinational companies, they have to make some changes to adapt to the new reality. But then here's the question. We know business operation, they can't be happier to be free from interference of politics, including geopolitics. But can they be free from geopolitics, the effects of that?
Of course not, right? I think it's fair for those companies to go multinational, as Mr. Liang said, but we should not exaggerate the risk. We see companies moving their facilities to Southeast Asia. Actually, that's natural for the Chinese economy. So by that count, China is at the stage to move some of the labor-intensive industries to other countries, right? I don't think that's a bad thing for China. That's actually a good thing for China because that means the Chinese industry has to upgrade. And it's good for surrounding countries, ASEAN countries, India, you just name it, all the developing countries in Asia. That's going to help China's geopolitical situation because those countries will be more integrated with China's manufacturing. As Ben just said, I don't think there will be a day that China is going to lose the status of world's factory. I really don't think, at least in the next 10, 20 years, China is still going to be the hub, the great hub of world manufacturing.
I want to ask Mr. Ferry, you have been following this shift of the Chinese manufacturing to Southeast Asia, to South Asia. I wonder, what are the factors that made these regions more attractive to the investors? And also, is it really good to have more regionalization and deglobalization?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here at Boao Forum. It's good to be invited. I also would like to thank the House of Rossetti to organize the Italian delegation every year. Coming to your question, I believe we should analyze this trend considering two main points. First one, of course, the impact that COVID-19 had on global supply chain and specifically on China. But another important point is the growing, booming middle class that we see in Southeast Asia. Middle class is becoming larger and with a higher purchasing power. Coming to the first point, COVID. Of course, COVID had a huge, tremendous impact on global supply chain. All the closure, all the shutdown, of course, they basically interrupted and disrupted the flow of material and finished goods. But I personally believe that the virus also highlighted some of the structural problem the supply chain had before COVID. For example, supply chain was overstretched, so too long. There was actually a lack of skilled labor. And of course, the just-in-time strategy, like before it was said, it was too much cost-driven. And a lot of companies, they were running unnecessary risk. I think this is something that really happened. Of course, China's situation was a little bit worse because the closing for 2 years forced some of global manufacturing to move the production in Southeast Asia. But mostly, this company are the companies that are producing for international markets. Because companies that produce for China, in China, of course, they will localize more and more the supply chain in China. So this is the first point. Second point, like I said before, middle class in Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines are growing. And they want to spend, they want better product, better service. And multinational companies that are targeting these consumers, they need to be close to the end market. They need to be close to the end users because they can customize the product, they can understand better the market. Of course, it will be also price competitive to produce close to the market, and you can cut, of course, the cost of logistics and delivery. So this is actually a natural development that is happening for serving the market in Southeast Asia. And for the same reason, like I said before, in China, company that will produce for the Chinese market, they will localize the supply chain. Of course, some things, they need to be seen again, reconsidered. Like I said, just-in-time strategy will be reconsidered. Probably will be much more investment in raw material, in warehouse, in stock. And of course, this will impact the capital management, working capital management. It will have an impact on the profit and loss line. But still, company, they need to be able to face this new reality. I would like also to contribute with the experience of Fincantieri, the company I represent in Asia Pacific and China. I actually run both the markets. And in China, we are building the first cruise ship for the Chinese market, large vessel, together with our partner, China State Shipbuilding Corporation. And for us, it's very important to localize the supply chain because 70% of the value of a cruise ship is the suppliers. For example, yesterday morning I was meeting the chairman of Waigaoqiao Free Trade Zone in Shanghai, Mr. Wang Xi, just to understand together how we can cooperate better to attract more European suppliers, specifically Italian, to come to Shanghai to support our project. On the other hand, Fincantieri, we have a production in Vietnam where we produce for ships for the wind farm application, offshore wind farm application for international market. So from Vietnam, we serve international customers. Also in that case, our strategy is to localize the supply chain because we want the supply chain close to the shipyard. So this is my opinion about this. It really depends about the business, but I agree that China will be a manufacturing warehouse for the future. And if you move to Southeast Asia, it's because you need to serve that markets. Thank you.
Ben, some of the manufacturing shifting is, happens naturally because they want to avoid the high cost of labor, for example. But some of them is happening simply because of the politics. Like, do you have any study, like what's the percentage of the manufacturing shifting from China to Vietnam, to other Southeast Asian countries, or to South Asia, for example?
So most of the production that's leaving is going to Vietnam, primarily. Vietnam has picked up 9% of global export share in consumer electronics, 6% in computers, 5% in furniture. These are not small shares, they're sizable numbers, but the products are quite specific. Often the component parts, whether it's the thread used in a dress shirt, it's the PCB board used in a consumer electronics, they're often coming from China, right? Indonesia and India have not captured significant shares across entire product lines or industries. They've captured shares from some companies, such as Foxconn or others, but it's quite small. Mexico was an option for a period, but has primarily captured share in iron and steel. So again, it's a very product-specific story. We have seen the movement of some heavier goods, such as white goods, household white goods, refrigerators, for instance, go to Mexico or Poland, partly to reduce overall transport costs. These products are heavy. But again, it's a very marginal change. Now, it is and will continue, but just as it took North Asia 10, 20 years to develop China as a manufacturing base, it will take just as long to develop Southeast Asia, South Asia, or even markets back in Europe and North America.
Well, Yang, earlier you mentioned that basically you are confident that China will be fine despite the shifting for industries. But do you think China, from either officially or privately, should we do something to prepare, to get prepared for the rain days? If manufacturing are moving, say, probably to a percentage we can't tolerate or can't accept because of the politics, like the U.S., they are going to even ban the investment in China. What should China do, from the government level and also the private sector?
Oh, as I said, this is also a lateral process, right? Geopolitical situation probably has accelerated this process, but eventually one day, most of the industries that has been transferred to Vietnam are going to be transferred in the future anyway, right? So from the U.S. side, they have to pay higher prices, okay? So that's the American problem, not China's problem.
You mean the customers, right?
Yeah, that's right, right? So look at China's growth of export. It's still increasing, okay? Which means China is actually more to surrounding countries, okay? All right, not direct to the United States, but through surrounding countries, right? So the game has been changed, but the essence is still the same. China is still the world's factory. And I firmly believe because of the size of China and also because of the completeness of Chinese industry, it's very, very difficult for high-end industries to leave China. That's almost impossible, okay? This is a vast country, vast territory, vast population, like our foreign friends here. They still want to invest into China just because the size of this country.
Mr. Farr, go ahead.
Yes, this is a very interesting point when we talk about the size of the country. I just want to share with you a couple numbers in our industry, which is cruise industry, passenger ships. Before COVID, in all the globe, there was 30 million passengers, and US was the first market with the 13 million, which in a population 350 million is basically 3% of penetration rate. China, in very few years, it became the second market with 2.5 million passengers in 19, but of course, over a population of 1.4 billion. So you see that if we need to use the same math that we use in US to calculate what could be the penetration rate in China, the potential of the growth is just huge. Now, of course, COVID, it was bad for the industry, for everybody. Now we expect that the market will be back in China, and we are confident that we'll, if follow the rate of growth before COVID, it will be probably the biggest market in 10, 15 years. So I believe, like you said, that the size of the consumers, it's something that you cannot just neglect.
George, you mentioned the plan A, plan B from companies level to deal with these challenges, rising challenges, unexpected sometimes. But from the country level, like in the situation of China or other countries, what should the government do to help probably with their own companies to prepare for the upcoming challenges, upheavals?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm less pessimistic as an industrial player because we are facing these tough challenges every day. So I think the current reshaping of the supply chain is not driven by the natural market economy, but manipulated by these geopolitical situations. Because U.S. has a strategy to decoupling with China. I think they published their national security strategy on their website. So they said because the world economy rely on China too much. That's why China has been using this power to threaten the other countries to follow Chinese political view. So this is why U.S. is leading their alliance strategically to decoupling from China. So this is the truth. So this is not because of the market economy. So we have to face these problems. So many small companies they don't have the luck to move outside China because the U.S. have a 25% tax. They don't have the financial power, or their business is too small. They cannot afford to relocate. Otherwise, it's too much cost. It's too much cost. They just stop the business, maybe. But big companies, so they still can afford to move outside China or move to the home country to their customers. So this is the situation. I think Chinese government I think they are supposed to help those small enterprises, medium enterprise, to move proactively outside China, because they are still owned by China. China is still ultimately beneficial of this manufacturing relocating. But if you don't do that, some of the manufacturers may be replaced by the foreign, completely no related with China. I think I think some government has already been doing. I heard some provinces they set up an industrial park in Vietnam or in Mexico, and they're helping their small enterprise to move outside China because they can still pay lease, they can still benefit from this.
Well, with that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Yu Jinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.